Good afternoon and welcome to the Meet a Lifelong Learner webinar. My name is Danica Saunders. I am the event coordinator for SACAP and I will be your host this afternoon. Right, we are extremely excited to have Shayna with us this afternoon. Shayna is a pragmatic creative and has an insatiable curiosity around all things concerning the human condition. Shayna has a particular interest in seeing how eating disorders and diabetes impact not only one another, but also the mental health of the individual as someone that has dealt with it personally. She is an avid lifelong learner concerning all things psychology and the human psyche. Shayna has completed 5 short courses with SACAP Global and has since signed up for an additional 3. Wow, Shayna, that is quite impressive. Let's kick off the webinar with the first question.
Sure.
So why did you decide to sign up for specialized psychology short courses?
Hi everyone. I think I'd just like to start off by stating, so I am first and foremost interior designer. I have my own business. And I think what was particularly important to me in terms of growing my own business from the get-go is understanding the dynamics of the individuals of my employees. I think having had worked for a couple of people previously before starting my own business, I saw how incredibly important it was to understand not just in terms of their own context of their environment that they were coming into, but how my own upbringing and my own traumas and all of that affected my organizational space and environment. And so I made the decision last year, particularly after a very tough 2020-22, just in terms of dealing with my diabetes, as well as my other mental health struggles, that would be important for me just to do that ongoing process of informing myself, but also being able then to apply that within my organization, and also offering help to those who don't necessarily have access to that sort of information.
Amazing. That sounds so lovely. Yeah, let's get to the next question. How was your online learning experience?
I think what initially drew me, first of all, to the short courses and the micro credentials and so forth is that having have my own business, I find it typically a bit difficult to, sort of juggle the in-between of wanting to focus on my business and scaling that, but also wanting to invest my time in the ongoing process of increasing my own knowledge, but also practically applying that within a personal capacity as well as my own business. So I love that in terms of the different short courses that there are different time periods with which you can choose. So that makes it easier to sort of look at my own schedule and see where I can accommodate and see where I can fit that in. And then also make time for myself, especially coming after work. I think after having a hectic day, or whether it's a big job or a project, seeing how, funny enough, it's often the case of when I'm working on a particular workshop or a short course, how a lot of things then end up sticking out for me, and then I'm able then to practically apply that not only just in my work environment, but within myself, and being able to recognize that, I think, is important for me.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can pick up things once we're made aware of it.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. Do you feel you are applying your newfound knowledge and the practical skills that you've gained?
Yes, so I think I'm most excited about this question. And that is more so in reference to my own personal experience. So as Danica sort of stated at the beginning, I have my own mental health struggles, which includes eating disorder, but I also have diabetes, and I have a lot of trauma, as I suppose each and every one of us do. But for me, just being able to complete those courses and whilst going through it at the same time, just being able to recognize my own patterns and behaviors and seeing how I can then implement that within myself, I think is often eye-opening, first of all. But it's also insightful in the way that I can then translate that within my work environment, but also just in a personal capacity. So definitely I use it in my own business. I've made several changes around the dynamics between my employees and myself, as well as the relationships that I have in terms of familial relationships and with colleagues.
Thank you so much, Shayna. If it's worth anything, I think you are a powerhouse and you are doing amazingly well.
Thank you.
So did you receive value from the short courses you've completed?
Yes, I think just following off of the previous question, I think the more courses I completed, the more value I saw in doing more. I'm a firm believer in, life doesn't just stop at high school or university. It's an ongoing process of being making myself aware of things that you don't necessarily ordinarily have the time to sit down and do the work yourself. So to have those courses available and just to allow yourself to become more perceptive to patterns and behaviors that you might not necessarily have made the connection with, to both in a personal capacity as well as an organizational perspective. I see great value in that, and that's why I continue attending the courses, doing the CPD workshops, anything really that can add to the knowledge and the perception of my own understanding, but also, in the outside world as well.
Fantastic. That was an amazing answer, Shayna. Thank you so much. Is it safe to say then that you believe in continuously developing on both a personal and a professional level?
1,000%. I think both impact one another tremendously. And if I just think over the last couple of years of my personal development and addressing issues that specifically touch on a lot of the workshops and short courses that I've completed, and how that has impacted my workspace environment as well as the mental health of my employees. I can see a great shift, both in terms of open communication, allowing that dynamic of being able to address issues when issues do arise, but then also just being cognizant enough of myself, and knowing where I then need to maybe further investigate or increase my knowledge in the ability to understand maybe something that I don't completely relate to, but can see within clients or my family. So yeah, I definitely believe that there is no end to learning, and I think there's so much value in continually trying to deepen your awareness both within yourself, but also just within the work environment, but in the world in general.
100%. Amazing. Okay. And then I think we're moving on to our last question. If you had to describe the SACAP Global short courses in one word, what would that be?
I was thinking about this, and I think the first word that popped up in my head is empowerment. I think it's incredible that, you don't necessarily have to be attending a SACAP or an institution to develop those skills. I think it's a lovely way to make it accessible to a lot more, human beings who have either work commitments but are invested in, trying to deepen their own awareness of their own trauma, or whether it be finding ways how to implement mindfulness in their lives. When I think about the courses that I've done and how it's empowered me both in a personal capacity, but also just within my own business, and especially I think dealing with my diabetes. I had a very volatile relationship with my diabetes growing up. And I think the more that I began to understand the trauma and the mental health issues that weren't addressed as a 6-year-old, and didn't have the capacity or the emotional capacity or cognitive ability to be able to understand that, having these courses available to me now, and then being able to make sense of it and imply it, or and implement it in my own life today, I think has been one of the most profound things that I have found, especially over the last year, and why I choose to continue doing as many courses and as many workshops as I can, because to me it's important. I think the more self-aware I can become, not only of myself but of those around me, then how can you not feel empowered?
Thank you so much, Shayna. That was such a lovely response. And so true. I feel like the life journey that we are all on, everyone is different, but the continuous learning and the continuous remaining aware of yourself, continuous introspection is so, so important in many different spaces of our lives, especially with relation to others in our communities, in our homes. But they do say that your relationship with yourself is the most important. So to do that for yourself is fantastic, and it's really, you are an inspiration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, Shayna. We have now come to the Q&A section of the webinar. If any attendees have any questions for Shayna, please do pop them in the Q&A box.
Sure, I can definitely answer that for you, Lindy. I think one of the most profound courses that I found of high value and still to this day implement daily, in terms of my being self-aware or cognitive of patterns and behaviors that I implement in my life. It's first of all the introduction to crisis and trauma, and just being able to understand how that's impacted me in a personal capacity, dealing with multiple mental health issues. But also there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danica, I think it was either a CPD workshop or a short course that related to mindfulness and trauma sensitivity around that, as well as developing a growth mindset. I think for me, the importance of that, and just reminding myself that I don't have to stay stagnant or stuck in the same patterns and beliefs that I had growing up from 6 years old, being diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, and to only then addressing it as an adult. I think now I can realize the importance of the continuous learning and how important it is to, keep updating yourself with the relevant information that can only benefit you. So I don't know if that helps you.
Maybe just to give the attendees some context, Lindy had asked Shayna if she could recommend perhaps 3 to 4 short courses from her experience. What would those be? Okay.
So there is a question asking about needing advice on which courses to take. I'm assuming it's within regards to short courses. I don't know if it's in reference to actual programs that a SACAP offers. But in terms of courses, how I went about that is just having a look through what was on offer and what I felt would benefit me in terms of being able to understand not only myself, but how it would apply greatly within my own work context. So I think for me, it would just be a question of going through all the short courses and the workshops and the micro-credentials that seem relevant to you, that you find particularly of interest. And there's often a description in each of the short courses that gives you sort of a brief understanding of what the course will entail. And that's generally how I go about making the decision of whether or not I'd like to invest time in it.
Shayna, I do have a question for you, if you don't mind me just jumping in.
Sure.
How did you hear about SACAP Global, and what prompted the decision to study at SACAP Global versus other institutions that offer short courses as well?
Sure. So I think growing up, as much as I'd love being an interior designer and having my own job, on my own business, sorry, there has always been the insatiable curiosity around the human mind and how the psyche works. And I think for the longest time, I was fearful of delving into that realm. And looking back on it now, I think it was more so scary in feeling like if I started that process of delving into, you know, crisis and trauma or mindfulness or any of the other courses that I've attended, that I wouldn't necessarily like the answers that were being given to me. But yes, after 2022 and having a really tough year in terms of my mental health and management of my disorders and illnesses, I finally found the courage to go after what I want. And for me, that is the pursuit of some other degree in psychology itself. And the reason why I actually chose SACAP, it was recommended to me in one of the treatment centers that I was at, because I had expressed a great interest in psychology and wanting to develop or deepen my own self-awareness in terms of addressing everything that I had gone through that year, but also just having the courage to actually start pursuing what I wanted. And I thought a great start would be by starting with the short courses and seeing how that went along. And then when I found that, you know, it was actually making me excited. And I think having that ability now as an older person and not necessarily being super young and making sort of I don't want to say irrational decisions on making what do you want to study, or I need to make a choice, let me do it within 2 seconds. I think now being a 30-year-old and having that ability to actually make sense of what I'm taking in has made it all the more, I think, profound for me and impactful for me in my own life. And one of the reasons of why I chose SACAP is that it's recognized globally. I think that was an important aspect for me, because as a business owner, as someone who loves traveling, the potential of always, you know, not remaining in one country forever. I wanted that flexibility of being able to know that once I've started something, that it could continue with me and not just be left behind.
Amazing. Thank you so much for answering that question, Shayna.
Sure. Yes, so there is a question that is asking if the courses that I've done are complemented by the undergoing therapeutic treatment in dealing with past traumas. Definitely. And are the courses a healing process for you, or personal development, or both? So I definitely say both. I think just in terms of being able to deepen my own self-awareness in my own processes of addressing my trauma and my mental health struggles, it has definitely helped tremendously, but also just in terms of an organizational perspective, being able then to take that awareness of myself and being able to apply it then within a larger context. Because as Danica said, we each have, our own experiences of life. And I think that's often mislooked in an organization where, it's not a one size fits all. And I think for me, it was incredibly important to be able to sit in a room and take that into consideration when developing teams, deciding who would benefit the most in certain projects, and also where I could make the effort into not changing my beliefs, but deepening my understanding of where a person might have a certain viewpoint that I might not necessarily understand or agree with, and finding ways to compromise and allowing growth in that regard.
That was an amazing question. Thank you so much to our attendees. Please keep them coming. Very well answered, Shayna. Thank you so much for your interaction.
I see Caroline ask, what type of learning experiences in the courses were the most enjoyable for you? Videos, discussion groups, assessments, etc. To be honest with you, I found the videos at the beginning very intimidating. Public speaking, funny enough, is one of my biggest fears. And so sort of putting myself out there has always been a great fear of mine. But as I've learned as a business owner, you sort of have to get over that fear and just move along with it. But what I found of particular interest was especially the discussion groups. And again, that just goes back into, and that was something that I had to humble myself in, is having blind spots. And in those discussion groups, having sort of a certain viewpoint on something and having a stark belief in that. And in those discussion groups where there are many opinions given, and being able to see how, your belief or your thought process in a certain aspect, in terms of a coursework or a workshop that you would be attending, could give you sort of more insight into something that you hadn't thought of or hadn't impacted you in any capacity. So I found the discussion groups really of great value, because it helped me think about my own process and where my blind spots may be. And then the assessments, I'm a sucker for being a lifelong learner. So anything academic and in terms of putting knowledge into practice is always a goodie for me.
Thanks so much for your answer and for being candid. Okay, we do have another question in the Q&A box.
Yes, I see. Which Arthur is asking, which courses would you say added the most value to you as a business owner? So definitely for me would be the introduction to crisis and trauma, just because in terms of a personal and business aspect, I was very, I think, unaware of how that infiltrated into both my life, my personal life, as well as my business. I think and when you're not aware of how that sort of leaks into every area of your life, it's difficult then to see those blind spots and how that infiltrates, whether that's in terms of teamwork, team dynamics, in a personal capacity and interpersonal relationships, communication. And I think also one of the biggest ones one of the first courses that I did was an introduction to mental disorders regarding adolescence. And I think that for me was the most profound, because growing up as a 6-year-old diabetic, there was no such thing as mental health support in terms of being able to make sense of that as a 6-year-old. And I sort of just went blindly along the journey, trying to figure that out for myself, and obviously not attending to any of that as a 6-year-old, and then further along as I got older, deeply impacted me as an adult. And then just being able to use that course in terms of understanding how a child's mind works, especially in dealing with trauma. I think it gave me a lot more understanding into why why I am the way that I am, and what tools and interventions I can use to help not only myself, but also when I do eventually start my own family, and how I can help that and sort of stop the generational cycle of trauma.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shayna, for answering so honestly and sharing with us.
Nice.
I have another question here for you. If anyone else like you were unsure about starting their journey in counseling and psychology, would you recommend these short courses as a good starting place?
Definitely. I think that just goes back to sort of one of the previous questions that I answered. It's difficult as, I think, a 30-year-old or even as a teenager, making that decision about whether or not you're making the right choice in terms of your career path. And I think for me, doing the short courses and the workshops was a great insight into whether or not that I could see myself doing this long term, or if it was just something that was of interest to me and that I just sort of wanted to add as like a sort of side hobby. But I think as you mentioned at the beginning, that I've already signed myself up to 3 additional workshops. It's very much, I think, the answer in itself that it's a good starting point and a good indicator, at least for myself. I can only speak for myself, in which direction I want to head into in terms of psychology, but also just understanding whether, it's just a curiosity or if it really is something that I want to invest my time in.
Shayna, thank you so much yet again for being part of this webinar. You are such an inspiration, as I mentioned earlier, and I think the work that you are doing on yourself is so amazing. And I do think that this seems to be a passion more than just something that you are interested in.
Yes,
If all the
no,
signups is anything to go by.
yes.
But we are extremely happy that you feel this way about our short courses.
And
And
thank
our
you. Yeah, I think I just wanted to add, I think, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak so candidly about something that has always been a passion of mine. And in just doing the short courses, finding that courage to actively pursue something that is incredibly important to me, not only in a personal capacity, but also just in wanting to help others.
Amazing. I think you are doing a smashing job. Okay. If there aren't any further questions for Shayna, I think we can move to the end of the Q&A session. Please do follow us on our various social media channels to stay up to date on upcoming events, program launches, and updates to see the recording to this webinar. Thank you once again to Shayna for joining us today, and for our attendees for joining. We wish you a wonderful day further.